Welcome back. In the last video, I provided an overview of the first 39 chapters of Isaiah. This video will begin exploring chapters 7 to 12, which recounts the first crisis of Isaiah's ministry. As I mentioned in the last video, the three main characters of this crisis are Tiglath-Pileser III, king of Assyria, Ahaz, king of Judah, and Pekah, king of Israel. But before we delve into chapter 7 of Isaiah, let me provide you with some necessary background information about this first crisis. And let's begin by examining a specific inscription by Tiglath-Pileser III dated around the mid-8th century. In this inscription, Tiglath-Pileser III writes, quote, "I received tribute from Gutsapi of Komenji, Rezin of Damascus, Menahem of Samaria, Hiram of Tyre, Sibilitli of Byblos." End quote. If we now bring up a map with these locations, we can clearly see that Assyria at this time has a strong control over the Levant and is extracting tribute payment from these areas. I also want to draw your attention to the king of Damascus. This inscription tells us that Rezin is the king of Damascus, so let's put Rezin onto the board, for he will be a major player in the first crisis. We should also remember that Damascus is the capital of Syria, also known as Aram, and in the rest of this video, I'm going to be referring to it as Aram. This inscription also tells us that Menahem is the king of Samaria. And let's remember that another name for Samaria is Israel. So Menahem is the king of Israel. And Menahem is making tribute payment to Tiglath-Pileser. And this fact is confirmed in 2 Kings 15, in verse 19, which reads, quote, "King Pul of Assyria," which is just another name for Tiglath-Pileser, "came against the land. Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver, so that he might help him confirm his hold on the royal power." End quote. So here we're told that Menahem was able to maintain his power by taking on a vassal status and paying tribute to Assyria. Now, Menahem's decision to make Israel a vassal of Assyria undoubtedly made him very unpopular with the people of Israel. And it's the likely reason why Menahem's son, soon after taking the throne, is killed by Pekah, son of Remaliah, a man who wished to break free of Assyrian control. This point is made by Watts in his commentary, quote, "Menahem, who apparently bought a period of respite by paying heavy tribute to Tiglath-Pileser, Menahem's son reigned scarcely a year before being assassinated by an army officer, Pekah ben Remaliah, who assumed the throne. Pekah's determination to throw off the Assyrian yoke may have inspired the coup d'etat, as did his prompt alignment with Rezin of Damascus, some Philistines, and some Edomites to form a coalition against Assyria. Thus King Pekah of Israel, upon becoming king, begins to take steps to break free of Assyrian servitude. And in order to do this, he forms an alliance with King Rezin of Aram, who is likewise sick and tired of paying tribute to Assyria. And it's also very likely that he forms an alliance with the Edomites and Philistines, which will become clear later on when we read the biblical accounts. Now, after forming this alliance, Pekah and Rezin decide that to be successful in this revolt against Assyria, they must also have the support of Judah. But King Ahaz of Judah is not interested in fighting against Assyria and will not join their alliance. And because Ahaz will not join their alliance, Pekah and Rezin decide that they will attack Judah, overthrow Ahaz, and in his place put a king who will join them in their rebellion against Assyria. As Watt notes, quote, "Pekah joined an Armenian force in a siege of Jerusalem to force a change of rulers and make a more militaristic and nationalistic policy." End quote. Now, we have two main sources outside the book of Isaiah that provides us information about this first crisis: 2 Kings chapter 16 and 2 Chronicles chapter 28. They both begin by telling us that Ahaz was an evil king, and then give us specific details about the crisis. So let's begin with 2 Kings chapter 16, in which we read the following in verse 5, quote, "Then King Rezin of Ram and King Pekah son of Remaliah of Israel came up to wage war on Jerusalem. They besieged Ahaz, but could not conquer him. And at that time the king of Edom recovered Elath from Edom, and drove the Judeans from Elath. And the Edomites came to Elath, where they live to this day." End quote. Thus, as I mentioned before, it seems that the Edomites joined Aram and Israel in their rebellion, as here we're told that the Edomites take a bit of land from Judah. Now after this attack, Ahaz is terrified. So what he decides to do is to pay tribute to Tiglath-Pileser III in return for his protection against these northern powers. And we read this in verses 7 and 8. Quote, Ahaz sent messages to Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, saying, I'm your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me from the hand of the king of Aram and from the hand of the king of Israel, who are attacking me. Ahaz also took the silver and gold found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent a present to the king of Assyria. End quote. And this fact that Ahaz paid tribute to the king of Assyria is confirmed by Assyrian inscriptions. In one inscription we read the following, quote, In all the countries in which I received the tribute of Jehoahaz of Judah, consisting of gold, silver, tin, antimony, linen, garments with multicolored trimmings. Thus, this inscription confirms that Ahaz was paying tribute. As you can probably notice, he's referred to as Jehoahaz, but scholars still believe this is referring to Ahaz, just with a theophoric addition to the name, Jehovah. We are finally told in the 2 Kings account that because of this tribute, Tiglath-Pileser comes to the aid of Judah. In verse 9 we read, quote, The king of Assyria listened to him. The king of Assyria marched up against Damascus and took it, carrying his people captive to Kir. Then he killed Rezin. End quote. Thus, Tiglath-Pileser protects Judah by invading Aram and killing Rezin. And that ends our 2 Kings account. Let's now turn to the second account of this crisis, which is found in 2 Chronicles 28, which has some slight differences to the 2 Kings account. The chronicler first begins by telling us that Ahaz is evil, and then says, quote, Therefore the Lord his God gave him into the hand of the king of Aram, and took captive a great number of his people, and brought them to Damascus. He was also given into the hand of the king of Israel, who defeated him with great slaughter. Pekah son of Remaliah killed 120,000 in Judah in one day, all of them valiant soldiers, because they had abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors. End quote. Furthermore, we are told, quote, The people of Israel took captive 200,000 of their kin, women, sons, and daughters. They also took much booty from them, and brought the booty to Samaria. End quote. So here we have an extra detail which isn't actually mentioned in the 2 Kings account, and that is that the people of Israel actually took 200,000 Judahites as captives back to Samaria. And the text reminds us that these were their own kin, fellow Jews that they are enslaving. I won't read the entire 2 Chronicles account, but if you do read it for yourselves, you'll see that even though Israel commits this horrendous act, they are still portrayed in a positive light by the chronicler. For we are told that many of the chiefs of Ephraim refused to take these Judahite captives as slaves, but rather they set them free. I'll leave that reading for your own personal enjoyment after you've finished watching this video, of course. At the end of the Chronicles account, we are told, quote, At that time King Ahaz sent to the king of Assyria for help, for the Edomites had invaded and defeated Judah and carried away captives, and the Philistines had made raids on the city in Shelepha and Negeb of Judah. End quote. Thus Ahaz calls upon Tiglath-Pileser, because also the Edomites and the Philistines have joined in with Israel and Aram on their attack upon Judah. Watt makes the following comment on the Edomites and the Philistines. Quote, These moves by Israel and Aram encourage Edomites to rise up against their Judean neighbors and take back towns in southern Judah. The Philistines used the opportunity to seize a piece of Judah on their border, as 2 Chronicles 28:18 records. End quote. We are then finally told that even after Ahaz paid tribute to Tiglath-Pileser, Tiglath-Pileser actually does not come to the aid of Judah. Rather, the king of Assyria attacks Judah. We read this in verse 19 to 21, quote, For the Lord brought Judah low because of King Ahaz of Israel, for he had behaved without restraint in Judah and had been faithless to the Lord. So King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria came against him and oppressed him instead of strengthening him. For Ahaz plundered the house of the Lord and the houses of the king and of the officials and gave tribute to the king of Assyria, but it did not help him. End quote. Now, if you were paying attention to the 2 Kings account, you'd realize that this passage is in a bit of tension with that other account. For in 2 Kings, we are told that Tiglath-Pileser helps Ahaz by invading Aram and killing Rezin. Dillard, in his 2 Chronicles commentary, briefly makes mention of this tension. Quote, Though the Deuteronomic historian reports at least some respite from Ahaz's overture to the Assyrian king, the chronicler views it only as a disaster for Judah." End quote. Now, we mustn't be too bothered about this slight contradiction, since they are rather common in the different retellings of the same event in Kings and Chronicles. And that now brings us to an end of the summary of the two accounts of the first crisis, the one in 2 Kings 16 and the other in 2 Chronicles 28. So now that I've given you this background information, let's now return to the book of Isaiah and go to chapter 7 and see whether all this background information helps us understand what Isaiah has written. In Isaiah chapter 7, verse 1 and 2, we read the following, quote, "In the days of Ahaz, son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram and King Pekah, son of Remaliah of Israel, went up to attack Jerusalem, but could not mount an attack against it. When the house of Israel heard that Aram had allied itself with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind." End quote. So, if I've done my job correctly, these two verses should make perfect sense to you. King Rezin of Aram and King Pekah of Israel are laying an attack on Ahaz, king of Judah. And it is into this crisis that Isaiah is going to speak to King Ahaz and tell him not to worry about these two northern threats, because they will soon be extinguished. And the next video will be analysing the three prophecies Isaiah delivers unto King Ahaz. I hope you join me then.